this piece. Let's see, I'm going to try and share that. Do you see this? Let me know when you see the Google document.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So this is a piece, this is from a blog, and I think that it probably has to do with content that you are all much more familiar with than I am. Um, the, let's see, I have to do this. What, we have a child, I want to see the curfew. I announced and looked at my Nanaji, who had just finished his Sandhya Puja. You can laugh at me as much as you like in terms of my pronunciation of things. Um, he has he has beads in his hand and some other things. So one of my first comments about this piece, because there's words in here that I don't understand, right? Which is because I'm American and I'm not familiar with these words. We do want to think about uh, who the audience is that we want to try and connect with. So if you have an audience, so in this case, I mean, language, right? Language is in a lot of ways the determiner of the audience, and we want to think about it in that way. So if we have even, it's not just are these are Hindi words. Am I saying that even correctly? You can nod if I'm right about anything. You can make
Yep.
me feel
Yep.
more comfortable
Yeah.
if you want.
No,
Okay, thank you.
no, you're
Um,
doing good. Thank you. Yes.
oh, okay, thanks. Um, so but it's not just having foreign language words, right? I want us to understand that it's all of our language. All of our language creates our audience. Not only does our language create our audience, but also our point of view, and to some, depending. This is the most tricky area. Our bias can create our audience too. Sometimes we write with a strong bias that really only welcomes other people in who share our bias. Does that make sense? This is nonfiction, by the way. So, um, but but for me in writing, it doesn't matter whether we're doing poems. It doesn't matter whether we're doing nonfiction, essay, fiction, plays, all of everything. I'm always talking about things that are pretty universal, which are audience, point of view, and the big thing is story, creating something that's like a story. A story is um, is an emotional journey essentially, and people want to read stories because they feel like they will benefit from reading stories. So that makes it a very different thing than things that we might read in order to have professional advancement, in order to learn how to work our computer, in order to learn how to fix our vacuum cleaner. Those are things that we read because we have a motivation coming in. A story is something that basically offers something of value to the reader, this emotional journey from which they will learn, and they come to us to read it. And I think that that is, having a story in our work is the most fundamentally important thing that we want to do in our work in order to gather readers, which is, I think, what we want to do because we want to communicate with somebody. Okay, so I just want to really underscore the point that we create our audience with what we write. So this work would probably exclude me, since there are times when I'm reading and I don't know what the words mean. It could also be that if I had a very rudimentary vocabulary, which in a way I do, of course, I don't know all languages, right? But if I have a very rudimentary vocabulary and you use really big words, then you're also going to be excluding an audience. So we're always conceiving, in a sense, our audience with the way we write. Um, I think that I think that this is a great piece. So like when I write, I definitely uh, I'll say I don't want to restrict my audience at all. So if anyone picks up my work, I want them to read it. I mean, that's my rule. I want, if they open up the cover and they read that first sentence, I want to do that thing that I'm talking about, which is grab the reader by the throat and you do not let go of them. I want as big an audience as possible because I can't control whether they're going to come over and open up the book, but I can control it once they do. Does that make sense? Um, so, so in this piece, I would already suggest it's very easy to go ahead and do little things which are defined, really defined terms. If you were using medical language, you could do the same thing. I picked up the stethoscope, which was a tool for listening to the heart with a flat, you describe the thing that you're talking about in order to allow people into the work. So that was one thing that I noticed here, but it's not by the biggest thing that I noticed, which was a technique that I thought was really great in this piece, was this piece uses a child and a child's point of view. So I really want to put that forward to everyone. Point of view. I will write it POV. Point of view is exceptionally important in our work. Who is seeing / telling the story? Who is the narrator? But I'm a little bit careful about that word narrator. So we have this child who's in a story, who's doing something and talking to the grandparent. The way I think of that character is as a character. So that's a character point of view. It is. I want us to embed that in our minds. You can, if it's helpful, write it down someplace. It's a character point of view. This piece is going to be interesting because it's also going to have a narrator's point of view. And in fact, in all of our work, we're going to have both of these. And one of the things that I'd like to say, and I think that this piece does it quite well, is that distinguishing between those two voices is very important because we show a contrast. We show this, the character's point of view, and then in this piece, we'll see that we shift to a narrator's point of view in a different paragraph, and that is exactly how I would suggest that you do that if you're working with this kind of pattern. So we have this child who says, I want to see the curfew I announced, and looked at my Nananji who had just finished, etc., right? Did you hear me? I would like to see the curfew now, I repeated. So this is sometime back in the 1970s when there's some student uprising is what I gathered from reading this. And this is a character who's experiencing and saying things in that time. So we can just go ahead and make a little cut for ourselves. That's like I'm going to make it 1976. Can everyone see this work here? So it goes, Nanaji quietly put his puja, etc., on the side of the corner, got out of the puja attire, changed into his lungi and banyan, picked me up and put me on his shoulders. My daughters are right now taking both Spanish and Chinese, so I am way mixed up. So please forgive me about my pronunciation. If I seem, he's like, is he pronouncing that like Spanish? I probably am. Picked me up and put me on his shoulders, and we set out to see the curfew. Okay, so we set out to see the curfew. That's that character in 1976. Look at this next paragraph. Those were the turbulent days of, oh, sorry, I just said 76, and here we go, 74. Okay, those were the turbulent days of 1974 and growing up in Patna. Okay, so when we have that sentence, we've just transitioned to the narrator. Is everyone with me? That is good. I definitely feel that I've transitioned from the character who's saying, take me to the curfew, to that was 1974. So having one paragraph that's in the character point of view, and then another paragraph that's in the narrator's point of view, is an excellent device for us to use in nonfiction. This is a device that I have used. It's basically alternating. And alternating is pretty much our pattern. We're always going to be alternating something in our work. And this is an example of it. So I want to what happened to my thing? I'm going to sorry. I'm going to try and share something else with you. I'm going to share my iPad with you for a moment. Let's see if I can do that. Share screen. Okay. Do you see my iPad a blank page?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So oh, did something kick out? Did it kick out?
No, it's still showing up.
I lost it. Oh, this is making me frustrated. You still see it? So do you see if I go like this, if I write this square?
I don't see a square. I just see the blank iPad page. And it's not
Sorry about that. I just cut the share for a second. I'm going to try and share again. Oh, I'll let you know that share. If you chat if you chat with me, I'm never going to see it. I'm this kind of focused person that can really only do one thing at once. It really frustrates my partner anyway when I do stuff around the house. I'm not seeing my pad come up. Okay, I'm gonna give up on that for now. I'll try and work on that technology for next time, although it's unfortunate. I really want to do that today. Let me go back to Google Docs. Do you have the Google Docs again?
Yes, I can see the Google Doc.
Okay. Sorry about that, but let's see, I was going to say, oh, for everyone who's sending in stuff, if you send it on a Word document or a PDF, then I put it into a different program that I can use a little bit more easily than Google Docs. So, but
yes,
anyway,
my apologies about that. I didn't know. So sorry about that.
No worries. I mean, I use Google, and it means I have to sit at my desk, which I sit at my desk a lot. Okay, so so I'm basically suggesting that in all of our writing, we're basically using patterns. We have, I'm happy to see we have a playwright, and I'm sorry I've forgotten your name, but she'll know this very well. So in story writing, we often talk about the A story and the B story. The A story and the B story, often the A story is the motivated story that the character has, what they want to get that's tangible, that usually projects them out into the future. And the B story is the emotional story. So for example, if you had a story about a doctor, you would probably have a story about them pursuing their medical career. And then the B story would be, let's say, their home and family life. And usually what happens in the story is that these two stories alternate throughout the entire work, and then they kind of join and merge into a feeling of reconciliation, whatever, wholeness that occurs at the end. Stories often work this way. They begin with division between two things, and they end in merger of those two things. The same is true. I often talk about protagonistic and antagonistic forces. So the protagonist and antagonist, the problem of the story that's first introduced is that these forces are split. And then we go back and forth between protagonism, antagonism, protagonism, antagonism, protagonism, antagonism. That drives the story until we arrive at a merger of those two forces. Okay, so if you follow that, we're gonna blow your mind at this point. That's also what's happening in this post. We have the point of view character is one of the forces, and the author who's coming in as a narrative voice is the other force. And if we can get these two to work alternately, and finally have something to do with each other so that they merge into a reconciliation. And this is very common in an essay, to have an author in the present, let's say me, trying, basically my motive is to reconcile with my past, to find some greater understanding in the present by reviewing what has happened. That becomes the point of the work. So in this story, in this essay story, right, according to me, we have these two forces established. The character point of view is one of them, and the narrator is the other. And now alternating those two back and forth is a very strong, it is our pattern basically. Alternating and forming contrast between things is what we do to show movement through the story, and is a very effective tool for us. So, Avatans, you probably realize a little bit that you don't do this consistently through the entire work, but I am saying that you have the rudiments right now to pursue this work so that it starts developing this contrast, this alternating pattern, which then creates basically the dynamic energy of the piece that leads somewhere. Avatans,
Yep.
does that make a
Yes.
little sense? So,
Yes,
so like,
absolutely.
now, so like I'm talking, you have to forgive me. Like if you don't follow everything that I'm saying, that's okay, because I will say, I only have about 3 things to say, so I will say them repeatedly. Just keep trying to take them in, you know, as time is going on, try to understand them. But basically, I'm suggesting that it's this dynamic energy between the two forces, as we see played out over and over again through the course of the story, that creates the energy that the reader then experiences. So now they're having an experience, an emotional experience in which, and I mean they're affected in the body. They feel tense, they feel relaxed. I mean, basically we deal with tension and relaxing the reader throughout the entire thing, and then at the end we join the forces for a moment of resolution that then feels like catharsis. That is the movement of story. And all of us, okay, you're not in competition with each other, you're in competition with everyone else in the world. You basically want to do this thing as well as you can in order to get and keep that readership, and have the readership feel like they got something from reading your work at the end of it. Because if they don't feel like they got something at the end, then they never come back to your work. So you got them once, but you don't get them again. We always want return customers as writers. Forgive me 1 second. So, those are the large points that I want to make here, and I also want to underscore that it's great. It is great to write the piece that allows us to get to this level, because now, I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but I don't think it can be overstated that the level of writing something from A to B is much different than the level we get to when we write a story. So when we write a story, and the thing is with us, unfortunately, as readers, is that we read stories that are effective and that move us, but we're not, I don't know what it is about human beings, we're not very in tune with the fact that we are moved or that we have emotional experiences. We kind of ignore that. But stories that are effective move you. And what we want to do as writers is we want to get to the point where we're moving the reader through an emotional experience. And when we do that, then they have this sort of non-verbalized payoff from our work, and they like it. They don't know what it is, but they like it. In this work, that alternating pattern breaks down, And then there's another slightly important thing in this style of work. This is an essay. Remember, you have the point of view character and you have the narrator. And if you work in nonfiction like this is I think, a really, really important concept to understand, and it's important for all of us in our storytelling. Who is the protagonist? Right? I'm saying we have the two forces on the page. We have the character point of view and we have the narrator point of view, but which of those two is the protagonist? Whose story does the reader fundamentally care about? Who is going to be changed by this experience, and through whom am I going to experience that change also? Basically, who is the person I'm rooting for, and who is going to be the vehicle for my reader experience? This is very important. Other times it's, this piece has not decided that yet, but it will need to. It will need to decide who is the protagonist. And the way I decide who is the protagonist is I say, who is changed by the experience? Does that make a little sense? Because we're going to actually do this because this is going to be our theme of the day. Change of character is going to be the theme of the day, but yeah. So deciding who is the central character that the reader is going to basically have a sympathetic resonance with and is changed at the end of the experience, that means that I get to have an experience in which I'm changed. It's not in verisimilitude, but it's me being able to experience difficulty, but in safety, peril and safety. I get to experience that change, that evolution, that move towards enlightenment, whatever it is. So that will also need to take place. But that's what we're doing when we create a story. Back to the A story and the B story, protagonist and the antagonist, is that what we're basically doing is we're creating this conflict that leads to a catalyst, right? A climactic moment in the story. We can think of it as being climactic up here, but it's often illustrated as being down here, as in a dark night of the soul, as in moving into the valley of death, whatever it might be. But basically around here, we have a climactic moment in which, the way I look at it, the protagonist has a choice. They have a choice basically either to merge with the antagonistic force, which is a kind of death of the ego, or they have an opportunity to refuse the merger, which is also kind of a death. Usually, it's a death of possibility and change, right? So, but the point I want to make is we use these two forces. Figuring out what they are is our first priority in every story. Figuring out the ending is not our priority. In fact, I would try and encourage you not to figure out the ending. This is how we use writing ourselves to get to new ground. We want to, as writers, we want to get to new ground. We construct the story mechanism to move us along and escalate to a point of climax and to create this catalyst. And what happens after that, ideally, we don't already know. If we already know what's happening after that catalyst, then we're actually not challenging ourselves. And I don't believe that writers want to get involved in writing not to challenge themselves. They're actually just repeating what they already know. And if they already know it, I hate to break it to us all, probably a lot of people already know it. We're doing something else. We're actually we're using this mechanism to create discovery. That's a big speech. Forgive me. It won't be the last time you hear me make it. But in this piece, we're getting there. So we have these isolated forces, and now we want to see them work together to get to a catalyst that's going to lead to some kind of change, basically, some kind of sense of enlightenment, some kind of something, and that's the thing of value to the reader. And if we get to that point, then the reader feels fulfilled also, and well, they feel fulfilled, and that's what we want. We want our reader to feel fulfilled. Then they close our book and they say, what else have they written? Avatans, do you have any questions?
No,
You're probably
thank you.
like, yeah.
No, thank you,
Ashvani?
thank you.
Yeah, sure. You're probably, your question is like, why did I have to endure all that?
That's part of learning. That's why we are here.
Yeah, and keep in mind, everyone, you know, so the way I look at this is a workshop. We are all writers. We're involved in the same struggle. I'm involved in the same struggle that you are. If it were easy for me, I would not be doing my job. It's not going to be easy for any of you. If it's not hard, we're not doing it. We're not really creating the device that leads to that next place. So, and my daughters are always like, I try something out on them, like a joke usually, and they're like, Dad, keep it in the workshop. Ashvani? Yeah.
Can I ask a quick one? It appears to me that all the paragraphs in the write-up that we have in front of us are from the same point of view, the first person point of view by the person who is writing the story. Those were the turbulent days of 74, and I grew up in Patna. I had the front row view of, so he just continues. It's not, the narrator is not in the picture at all. It's just the first person point of view, isn't it?
No, so I look at things a little bit differently than, a lot of people will talk about, you have a first person point of view, a third person point of view, second person point of view if it's in you or something like that. And no, actually, well, what they usually say is that you have a first person narrator, third person narrator, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to put away this idea of narrator. The narrator, as I say, the narrator is always going to be involved, and then ideally you're also going to have characters too. I'm trying to make a distinction between what's going to be from the narrator's point of view and what's going to be from the character's point of view. So that means the experience of the world as seen through the character. So like I could write in past tense or present tense, but I could say, I walked into the store, I saw the milk at the back in the counter, I walked back there, I looked at the cans on this side. So I'm basically seeing the world through the character who's walking through the store. I, as the writer, am not walking through a store, right? I'm at a desk typing things. So I want to make a distinction between a character and kind of the narrator who is somewhere else outside of the story. There's someone who's in the story, who's a character. They're physical. They have flesh and blood, kind of, right? As represented by words. And then there's someone who's typing and writing the things. And so here we have a boy in 1974, right? Who's saying, I want to see the curfew. That's a character in the story. And we have a writer who says, those were the turbulent days. That kid is not saying those were the turbulent days. Yeah. So this distinction, yeah. So
got it. Thanks. Got it.
Yeah. So that distinction is really important, and it's definitely muddy, you know, because there's going to be a lot of things that if I write, I walked into the store, well, that's not really me having the experience, because that's someone writing about me having the experience. So there is a narrator that's doing it, but the point of view is going through my eyes, my ears, you know, this physical character. One way to think of it is it's also kind of the majority feeling, right? It's not every word, it's the feeling of it. And one way I think of it is that the character is physical and the narrator is essentially metaphysical, right? They're not a physical presence in the story. In 1974, this writer does not exist. We could spend a little more time with this piece, But another way to really ratchet this piece down for me would be to make sure that each paragraph really was from the point of view of either the child or from the point of view of the narrator. Right now, there is at least one paragraph where it's kind of mixed. And I would not do that because I want the reader to have the experience of going like this. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. I do not want an ambiguous experience. I want them to experience contrast because that's how I make them feel something. But yeah, thank you for the question. It's great to make me clarify some of those points because I don't think about writing in the way that it's often classically taught, and it's also usually classically taught by people who do not write. I will just say, what informs me is the way my imagination has to work in the story. Okay, I'm going to stop this share. Yeah, Ram.
Yeah, I have a question. So
Yeah.
can the protagonist be a concept or an ideology instead of being a physical person?
So I think that we do best. Okay, so we're getting into, this is going to be kind of a metaphysical conversation. So forgive me. So most writers who are dealing in fiction and things like that are playwright. We're dealing with physical people. And one of the differences between, fiction and those kinds of stories where we think about dealing with people and writing nonfiction often, let's say a thesis-driven work, is that we think about this being about ideas. So I will say something about the protagonist, which is the thing that's principally important about the protagonist. The thing that is principally important about the protagonist is that the reader has a sympathetic resonance to the protagonistic force.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not saying whether that force has to be absolutely physical or not, but I am saying that the baseline is that if I am not basically somehow attached sympathetically, it doesn't mean that I think that it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I somehow have a sense of personal attachment to it. It doesn't matter what ends up being said. If I don't have that, then you just have a polemic, but you have a polemic that's just, so I'll tell you how I think about it. So if we have a thesis-driven argument,
right,
the thing that a human being attaches to most is honestly another human being. This is the way we are. Okay, so the more I can feel that there's a human being on the other side of the protagonistic force, the more likely I am to attach to it. If it's a cerebral argument, up here, why do I care? So this is one of the ways we use, I think, a thesis statement, and I said this last week a little bit, but it's worth, I think it's worth really trying to get into our head. It's not about the value of our ideas. It's the stake. It's the personal stake. And so when we have a writer, so this is the way I think about it in terms of a nonfiction work or a thesis-driven work, is that basically the writer is the protagonistic force. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm motivated to do something. And I'm putting my career on the line in order to do it.
Okay.
Right? And I might not agree with them. In fact, I should not agree with them. If I agree with them, there's no point. Then we're just dealing in propaganda. So, in the U.S. we say preaching to the choir. You probably have a similar, idiomatic expression for that. But there's no. I don't do anything with preaching to the choir. I'm trying to get readers who don't think what I think. So, So yeah, so I think that, when we have that author
Mhm.
make a stake, they throw down the gauntlet with their thesis statement and they say, you think this, you're wrong, it's this.
Right.
That's a little bit more complicated than it seems at the moment, because if the author is not really taking a risk,
Mhm.
then there also isn't any attachment. I want to read about someone in peril in safety, right? So they have to actually take a risk.
Right.
If they're telling me, if they're saying, I'm making an argument, you think the sun doesn't shine during the day, and I think it does, there's no risk. So we have to do two things. I have to be able to attach to somewhere
Right.
a feeling of another human being really having a stake, because that's necessary for them to actually be in peril. If they're not in peril, I have no interest.
Right.
Because what am I learning?
Right.
I mean, so like in this way, it's kind of cool when you think about all stories. All stories are about characters or protagonistic forces in peril. If
Right.
they're not actually in peril, then why do I read? Because I'm trying to read in order to advance my own life, basically, to experience peril and take something away from it for my own survival.
Right.
We're this human animal. We're a human
Right.
animal, and we use stories to do this very thing.
Right. So essentially, what you're saying is that rather, if I'm a car salesman as an author, I should rather put the buyer in the driving seat of the car, take him for a test drive, rather than hand him a brochure of the car.
Yeah. Or tell them why the car is so great and going to change your life. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What you want to do is you want to be like, hey, you look really good in this car. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
But we want the reader again to, yes, we want them to basically I do think of the protagonistic force as a vehicle for an experience that the reader then gets to have. And so whether it's a physical character doing stuff or the protagonist as a, writing, making an argument of some kind, I want the reader to feel like I'm making the argument. And even if I, and you want it, so I actually hold the other side. I hold the antagonistic view. Then I want to be with them like, well, will they succeed in changing my mind? Will they succeed?
Right.
And by God, I don't think they are, because I think I'm a lot smarter than this author. So they better do a really good job.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is now really, really important. That antagonistic point of view has to be, that is the hardest one to do. Understanding our antagonists as writers, we usually pick a protagonist who we already feel a bias towards. Our real struggle is to really understand the antagonist's point of view, because our antagonist's point of view is the reader's point of view. And
I didn't understand that.
So if the thesis statement is, so I need to feel like there's some value to reading, let's say, this argument, this thesis statement. So as I say, it's like, you think this.
Okay.
That you is me. I think this. I don't think what you think.
Okay. Right. Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so now the moment you write me as a straw man, right? You know the straw man argument?
Yeah.
The straw man argument is the argument for everyone. The straw man argument is the argument you simply construct in order to knock down.
Right.
So
absolutely.
the moment you make me, right, I have that argument. And the moment you basically write me as being a stupid lummox, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense and is basically just crazy.
Right.
Then that's the same moment I'm not reading your work anymore.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Never thought about it that way. Yeah. Wow. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that.
But you could probably also tell that now that we bring it up to this state, well, it's a lot more exciting. It's a lot more exciting for everybody than just writing what you think.
So which means that if the reader is holding the antagonist point, then that increases the drama, because if the reader is already on my side, there is no drama, right? I mean, okay.
That's right.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. You're not. and you're not doing anything. That means you're going to go from here, I think this, and you do too, and then we're going to read this piece, and at the end we're going to be like, and I think this, and you do too.
Right.
Like
Okay. Yeah, that increases the contrast. Okay, so in a picture you need to have contrast, right? Unless you have good contrast and you don't see the picture. It's just black, all white or all black. Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. There's nothing's happening. We're looking at a white screen or we're looking at black screen.
Yeah.
We don't want that. We want to take that reader through, this is what I think, because the reader, this is the thing. We write if we're writing fiction, for example, or nonfiction story, we're writing about an experience, but we're also creating a reading experience.
Yeah.
Right? Our playwright is such a good example. She's creating these different characters. This character says something. Yeah. Okay, that's their point of view.
Right.
The other character says something.
Right.
That's their point of view.
No, but that's what is challenging, right? See, like as a playwright, I can visualize the dialogues and the scene playing out on the stage. I can visualize that. But how do I visualize how the audience is responding to it? Because unless I can get my finger on how the audience will respond to it, my writing cannot be sharper. Well, otherwise, I'm just being self-indulgent.
The main thing we want the reader to experience is we want to experience that variance, I've heard it called, right? We want them to experience, okay, this character comes in and says, you have to clean up the dishes. I want to go to a party, right? Like in the moment that this character says their thing, we understand their point of view. I'm in their point of view. I'm attached to their point of view. When this character says what she wants to say, I'm in her point of view. It's the same thing in our thesis argument. When we write the protagonist, you think this, you think that the world is flat, you're wrong, it's round. And I was like, okay, you think the world is flat, that's my point of view. Your point of view is it's round. Now we're going to go ahead. You've developed your feelings based on this. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, I get it. It's like what you've neglected to look at is is this. Now I have your point of view, and now we keep going and we keep building the argument. And
which means, please go ahead.
You take the reader through an experience like this. They're in one point of view. They're in the other point of view. They're in one. They're in the other. And the whole time it's going like this, right? And it's getting closer and closer. As the struggle becomes more pitched.
Right. Which means that the writing has to be such that I am controlling the response and reaction of the reader, not leaving him to his own devices.
Yeah, but you have to remember that they do have their own devices, so you better know your reader pretty well.
Fair point. Yeah. Okay, they're not dumb. Yeah, they're smart.
Yeah, you're right. So this is our work. Okay, we think that our work is to convey our point of view. That is not the work of a writer. The work of the writer is to know the human being. That's the work of the writer.
Right.
And not just us as a human being, to know every human being, and then create something, as you said, right? If there's no contrast, there's no dynamics. There's no drama. There's nothing is happening. It's like, and this is the thing that we don't know. So when we start writing, we write like, we think that writing is typing.
It's not, yeah.
We think that if we our teacher tells us to write a 5-page essay, and we think if we start with one day and we end with the end, that we've written something.
Right.
We haven't. We have not.
Right.
We've written like in the doctors, that's flat line. And it's like, and nobody wants to read that because this is something let's know human beings again. Time is what we have.
Right.
It's absolutely precious. I get to see the grass. I get to touch the trees. I get to smell the flowers. I get to step in dog shit. I get to do all those things are so much better than this.
Right.
So, but now the next struggle for us as writers is that given the fact that experience is the most important thing, how do we create an experience on the page that is so dynamic that a reader forgoes their life right? I don't go out and smell the cheese, the cheese. I don't smell the cheese and step in dog shit. I
Right.
instead read your work.
Right.
So now we see what the stakes are. We have to do something that's filled with contrast. Sorry to go to the playwright again, but I often think about this in our writing. So we have a reader, and there's a distance to our audience. This is the case on the stage. And if you see someone, if you were sitting in the audience, right, and after the show you walked up onto the stage, you would see that people had this makeup on, right, that would make them look grotesque, close up.
Right.
Why do they have that makeup on? They have that makeup on because they're being seen from a distance. This is the same in our writing. This is the same in our writing. So we are going to write things that are highly contrast. This is going back to the last piece we looked. You know, when I said I don't make it ambiguous about whose point of view I'm in. I don't make it ambiguous about whether I'm the protagonist's point of view or the antagonist's point of view. No ambiguity, because I have to make it grotesquely visible, and grotesquely felt by the audience.
Right.
That's why, unfortunately, what we tend to have, and this is people who are not. We're writing a verisimilitude of life, but this is why a lot of stories turn into, absolutely, people think of it, they reduce it to this. They think it's absolutely good characters versus absolutely evil characters. But the problem with that is no one looks at that and thinks that that's life.
Right.
In fact, that distances them from the work. Because, what I noticed in most of my life is I thought I was a good person and I thought other people were evil people. But then after a while, I was sort of like, they seem to think that they're good people too. It's driving me crazy. I definitely knew that I was good. I saw it in a dichotomy in which I'm good and they're bad. But now I'm like, but from their point of view, they think they're good and they think I'm bad. This is nuts. Now I have to realize that we all think this way. So, and I bring it up because when we have representations, like let's say your thesis statement, you think this idiotic, stupid thing.
Right.
You're wrong because you're an idiot, and this is what you should be thinking, right? So you're an evil idiot, and I'm a good, noble person who's going to illumine you. Okay, when we write that, it does not correspond to the way we understand life.
Right.
So let's go back to the idea that I can live life here, right? But I choose to read your work. I don't want to leave my life here and read a flat line, but nor do I want to leave my life here and read something that doesn't seem like life at all. Right? Because that's also like a flat line. Though it might be chaotically good and evil, wow, it still doesn't have any relevance to actually my physical living.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. I think it's amazing.
Which is why I would like to hear about somebody else's story and not my own.
Yeah, well, because
as in not my life story, right? I mean, I would be bored by my autobiography. I know it. There is nothing different.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that there's a really important conversation towards us. Actually, I think through writing and even through memoir, or in fiction, or however we develop our craft, we actually do have an engagement with ourselves in our own life. We can only know the other person by also knowing us, right? I mean, how do I know you? I can't know you as a human being without knowing me as a human being. Now we start to get somewhere. And so, you have had a life struggle, that is your life struggle. This is the baseline for all of our connection. In writing we say, we write struggle. Well, I identify. Remember that thesis? That guy who wrote the thesis. He throws down the gauntlet. He's like, he's going to be drummed out of the university. He's going to be, tarred and feathered and, told to squawk. He's really taking a risk. But I identify with that author's struggle. That's what I'm identifying with. And I see my struggle in life
Right.
Or I get to experience the emotion of my struggle, which we're generally told not to experience, right? Oh, shut up and take it, right?
Right.
But I get to experience my struggle of life through this character.
Right.
And so that is the baseline, and we all have the struggle. We have many universal struggles, and it's not just to find love. It is to find connection, yes, but it's also the struggle of having an interior world and an exterior world. There's the struggle of trying to be something so that you can be seen as something, but that's also a lie. We basically have human struggles that are based in not only just survival, trying to find food, but based in our sense of consciousness, and our struggle with the knowledge of death and having a life of purpose. All these things.
Fascinating.
I think so too, and I think stories are the way that we unlock all of this.
True. Very true.
Yeah. Okay, we better move on though.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Let's see. Am I sharing right now? Okay.
No.
So let's read.
Yeah, we can see that.
You can see this work?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I see everyone here. Is the author of the chase here? The author of the chase is not here, then maybe we will not look at this work. Let's look at Anvita. Anvita, do you want to read this work? I saw you a second ago. Anvita, you're here. You're here. Anvita, do you want to read? We can also just talk about it if you want. Hello, hello, hello. Maybe she's left. Well, we can. Ron, let's look at your piece since you're here and we know you're.
Sure.
Did you get this change? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hey, people here, Otis. I had terrible network issues for the last 5 or 10 minutes. I think so. Apologies about that.
Okay, no worries. Ram, would you like to? Why don't you read this one?
Sure. This is called Tincture of Iodine. 5-year-old Pappu bit his lip. The boys crowded around him in the playground, and for a moment he was the center of all attention. They will certainly put tincture on the wound, Viju declared with authority, shaking his head with sympathy. Viju was 3 years older and already in the 4th standard, so he had to be right. Pappu's heart skipped a beat. He had never had tincture of iodine applied on a wound before, but had heard from the other boys how much it stung. The tears almost came to his eyes, but he blinked them away. He did not want to cry. He was a big boy now, already in the 1st standard. Why, he had even started eating idlis without sugar, and as far as he was concerned, that itself qualified him to be a big boy. He hadn't cried when he had fallen on the ground playing chore police. Only LKG and UKG boys cried, and girls. So he had bravely swallowed the tears, but tincture? That was a completely different matter altogether. 2 boys from the 2nd standard marched him to the caretaker's office. The caretaker was essentially the school ayah, janitor, peon, and emergency medical assistant all rolled into one. Who is there, I say? Rang out the gruff voice of Bayama, the caretaker. The moment they heard her, the 2 older boys ran away, leaving Pappu alone. Pappu was now more scared than ever. Bayama was known to spank troublemaking pranksters, kids that even the mathematics miss couldn't handle. Would she spank him for scraping his knee? Will the class teacher put a remark in the daily diary? What if dad found out? For a moment, he forgot all about the tincture. He tried to peek around the half-closed door. If Bayama hadn't seen him, he could run away. But what would the boys say? Darpok, Darpok, they would tease him. Then the image of the purple tincture bottle came up before his eyes. They would sting for sure. Even if he wiped his tears away, the boys would find out. That would be worse. Girl, girl, they would tease him. Bayama, dark with her grey hair tightly tied behind her head, appeared at the door. Her hands smeared with remnants of the sambar rice she was eating. She didn't like being interrupted at lunch. She cast one look at his scraped knee and told him to go wash it with water. Papu was relieved as he turned around to go. Then it occurred to him that without the purple stain of the tincture, the boys would assume he had run away from fear. Should he ask Bayama to apply tincture? What if she shouted at him?
And then being 5 years old was indeed complicated.
Being a 5-year-old was indeed complicated, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I find this piece very charming. Ram, why don't I put it back to you? Given our conversation, today, what do you think?
So I think I would think that this is probably mildly amusing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I agree, and I love the language in it. I love the tincture of iodine. Let me try.
So the thing is, the contrast is not that stark here. The contrast that we spoke about, that is not that stark.
Right. What is the antagonistic force?
So here, when I wrote this, the thought I had in my mind is that the protagonist is a 5-year-old. So the protagonist's point of view is how a 5-year-old thinks, and the antagonist.
Got it.
Sorry.
Yeah, definitely, and I think you have that. But I'm asking, what is the antagonistic force?
So the antagonistic point of view, it's not really antagonistic. It is just that the antagonist point of view would be that, okay, you don't know how a 5-year-old thinks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think so this is how I love the writing here. I think it's great. I really do. But this is really going to I think it's great to look at it from this point. I have this. Let's face it. I mean, I find myself kind of a pain. I don't like it either. I don't like the stuff I say. It makes my life hard. But I would say, where is the antagonistic force?
There isn't a strong force.
Right. If we're suggesting that the dynamics of our writing come from the clash and the conflict between the protagonistic force and the antagonistic force, the details here are wonderful. I love the details, and the details are very important for us as writers. So let me speak to that just for a second. It's like what we do as writers is that we understand that we're taking the reader on this emotional journey. But somehow our reader does not understand that. And they don't understand it because we make them focus on details. We make them focus on the micro issues of the moment while we manipulate them through this emotional experience, which I sometimes call so if you think of the protagonistic force and the antagonistic force, I sometimes liken it to Aikido. If you've seen the Aikido master, and you might, the Aikido master, the person comes at them, the reader comes to them, and they go like this. They take him over here, right? And then they take him over here. And then they take him over here again. And then they subtly move their hand around the wrist, they take him, and then they flip him on their back. This is what we know we're doing with the reader. And so even though it's going to mean a big rewrite, the antagonistic force here are these other boys, right? This is, I mean, it's a wonderful childhood story, and I think it's one that we can all identify with, right? remember I said one of the universal struggles is the way we know ourselves and the way we feel like we have to represent ourselves to the outside world.
Right.
This is it, right? He's afraid,
right?
And yet he doesn't want anyone to know that he's afraid.
Right.
He doesn't want to reveal that. He doesn't want to reveal, and if you want to take this up to, it isn't just a boy's struggle, of course. It's a human struggle that we understand ourselves as people who can be hurt and have feelings, and yet we feel like we have to disguise that fact from others who will see that as a weakness, even though we don't know this, right? We don't know that they're exactly the same as we are. Right? That's the problem. They seem like they're impervious to pain, like my older brother, right? He seemed impervious to pain, and yet I felt I was often in pain. Right. So you're dealing with that universal struggle from the point of view of this boy, and so now the thing is we're going to bring in our knowledge from playwriting. Right? And we're going to bring in our knowledge from the actor who's wearing very grotesque seeming makeup from close up, but we need to put that makeup on them. We need to make these contrasts pronounced. We probably, and I would say, I understand how it's difficult, and believe me, I have to live with myself every day. You only see me once a week. So this is horrible, I'm telling you. But I would be like, immediately, I would say we got to get the antagonistic force physically on the page, and that's where the dynamic action is.
Okay.
Where it goes. So, and once you do that, now you've actually developed a mechanism of story that will take this somewhere. You basically use your alternating pattern to take us to the crucible.
Right.
And ideally, we create a story that's where these are even enough, where there actually is peril. You don't know what the answer is. That is the peril. If you know the answer, there's no peril. You don't know what the answer is. But you take it to the crucible in order to have a discovery, and then that is actually what the reader will also take away. And in some ways, I look at it like this. This is kind of cerebral, I guess. But I look at the story that we write as really the artifact of our own discovery process. So that the reader gets to experience it. It's like they get to experience, the husk of the insect. They get to have the husk of the insect, but we are the ones that live the life. We use this mechanism to get somewhere. So yeah, in a simple way, I would say, the simple way to go to this story is to get the antagonistic force on the page. And now we see what happens. There's nothing in a sense dynamic that will happen if we only have the protagonistic force. Because this boy is not being met with any, conflict.
So there is no conflict. But it's an internal conflict. There's only an internal conflict where he is like, he has fear on one side and he wants, like you said, camouflage the fear on the other side. So it's an internal conflict. It's not a pronounced conflict with a separate antagonistic force.
Okay, Ram, congratulations. You win the prize of me. I'm going to act out an internal conflict. Are you ready?
Sure.
Here we go.
Got it. I get that. Yeah. Got it. Thank you. Got it. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So there's good reasons why we use characters.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, may I make a point? Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. One is whatever gesture you made just now. No one, I couldn't see because it stayed on Ram. The video stayed on Ram. So. Oh,
okay. Well, I will tell you that Ram and I were actually doing exactly the same thing. We were just not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
So Ram, if you don't mind, go ahead, Otis.
No, please.
So Ram, if you don't mind, just a couple of things.
Sure.
I definitely agree with you, Andrew, that this is a very charming piece. And despite the fact that the terminology is India specific, it does talk to a larger audience. To your
Absolutely.
point that you made, yeah, the point that you made earlier. I have I also thought that the antagonist was that perceived fear of being laughed at and mocked at by the older kids, right? So in that sense, I was on the same page as Ram, but I do see what you're hinting at. How that would come about is obviously, it's Ram's choice. But I have a question for some of the markings that you've made here, and that's specifically about the two adjectives, right? So, shaking his head with sympathy, or so he had bravely swallowed the tears, right? So, can you just talk about that a little?
Yeah, I can. Okay, so that I would consider, really a micro issue. So it's not a big issue at all. It's micro issue, but it does have a lot. Well, let's say there's no micro issues, maybe, because it has a lot to do with how what we do when we write something is we basically merge the consciousness that we present on the page with the consciousness of the reader. And the things that I'm marking, basically, I might call them having a bias. I might say that it's editorializing or something like that. What it's doing is it's providing subjective information from somewhere. And when you provide, it's like the narrator comes in and provides subjective interpretation of what's happening. So what that does is it doesn't allow me to interpret. So, the way I experience life, right? I go walking around and I'm taking in information. I see a car speeding down. I'm like, well, stand out of the road. I think that's dangerous, right? I see someone, smile at me. I'm like, oh, they're nice. So I'm having an experience of interpreting the world around me all the time based on objective information.
Okay.
When the author comes in and supplies the interpretation, then that robs me of the opportunity to interpret for myself. I like to interpret for myself. That feels like living life to me, right?
Understood.
So,
great point.
So it's a little thing that we don't. Now, on the other hand, I think it can be very good to have Now, everything that comes from this is maybe a little bit complicated, but our characters have a point of view, and a point of view is an interpretation of life, right? It's an interpretation of a point of view because they see it that way. So I like it when characters express point of view, but I don't like it. I don't like it as a reader when the narrator expresses point of view, because now it's like I have a God who knows all, but is also limiting the experience, my experience, and I don't want it to be like that. So
that's a great point, Otis.
Yeah. So we want our narrators to be, I think, I lean towards having the narrator be as objective as possible, only write the facts. Now, of course, the narrator has a ton of control over the entire experience of the story because they're selecting all the facts.
Yep.
Great,
thank you.
Yeah, and what's great is actually, to me, it gets into sort of the psychology of the writer. When the writer wants to control the experience of the reader, then they add that subjective information. I'm going to tell you something about people, at least me. We don't like to be controlled, right? So
absolutely,
some of the illusion, and then if you read this, but what we have is like Viju declared with. I would actually say Viju declared shaking his head. I would get the authority out of there. Declared already tells me it's with authority, right?
Yeah.
So declared shaking his head. Now,
Yeah.
as a writer, maybe we haven't spun that, and the reader they might not know what to take out of it. But what they do know is that they're perceiving experience objectively, and that keeps them in the story.
Right.
I think it's one of the big issues for us as writers, basically having some control over our instincts, right? We have an instinct to want to be heard. We have an instinct to want to be able to, win the fight before it's even begun.
Right.
We love to get out there and beat the crap out of straw men.
Undoubtedly.
We don't get to do it. We don't get to do it. And that's why it's really, really fun.
Yeah. Interesting.
Thank you for that question.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I have my little rule. We'll see it somewhere else. I have a hierarchy of language too. So nouns are great. Nouns, I love them. Verbs I love. Adjectives, adverbs I used to joke. An adverb is a signpost that says weak verb ahead.
Yeah, it's a kind of writing lethargy, I guess.
Yeah, and I also used to often say if you write he ran quickly, right? So you actually ran quickly takes more time to read than ran. So you're actually creating this cognitive dissonance in your reader, where they're reading something that takes longer to express something that supposedly takes a shorter amount of time.
Right.
This is something I also think about with language.
Yeah, that's what some authors said, right?
I think it's a great piece.
Yeah. Just a concluding note. Some famous author said this. He said, "I am sorry I didn't have the time to write a shorter letter."
Yeah, right. I'm sorry I didn't have time to write a shorter letter. Exactly.
Thanks for your feedback.
Let's. Is Deepa here?
This was good. Thank you very much.
I love this. Deepa? Oh, I don't know who's here. Okay, well, we're going to have to conclude a little bit. Deepa's not here, but I would like to bring up this story a little bit. The monk who craved rose milk. So, in fact, I would say, I want to say with all of these, there's a significant thing that's not happening with all of them. And the thing that's not happening with all of them is the perception of story as being an emotional event that has an effect on a character, the protagonist, and therefore through that also has an effect on the reader. Now we could argue that these pieces are short, and if we only have 6 pieces or something like that, if we get around, we can talk to Hari Kiran and see if we want to expand the length of some of the pieces, as we move along. So I understand the feeling like, well, you're not completing a story necessarily. So just put that argument aside and the defensiveness that we can feel, when I start attacking. But I want to bring up this idea that a story is about character or protagonist change. And I'm going to do it just in this one simple way. A character comes in some way, okay? We have to get that on the page. How are they now? They're feeling hopeful, they're feeling something. They have to have some state, either positively or negatively. And we've always talked about really drawing contrast, so we really have to know what that is. The story is an event, and the event is a conflict with the protagonist coming and meeting the force of protagonism. That is the event. Out of that event, and I know I did this the other week, this character must be different. What that means is, so I think for me, I understand it better by saying when it doesn't happen. Okay, so a character comes into a story if we don't know how they are, then we also don't know how they leave, right? They might be happy here and then they leave happy. If I don't know how they are here, or I don't know how they are here, I don't have any knowledge of whether they've changed or not due to the event. If a character comes in, they experience something and they are the same, my argument dramatically is that nothing has occurred. Does that make sense? Nothing has happened. My analogy is, if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, it doesn't matter. Right? Because the fundamental thing that we're doing with our work is we're taking the reader on a journey, and a journey must go from one place to another place. We cannot go from one emotional state to the same emotional state. We have not made a journey. So the pieces I looked at this week, were well written and very atmospheric, partially because they didn't develop an actual conflict in which something happens. We also didn't get to the point of experiencing any change in the protagonist. So this is
Otis,
again, yeah.
Otis, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Now that I'm back and I seem to have a stable connection, if you have time, would you mind going over, maybe spending a couple of minutes on the chase? I got your feedback. I wanted to see if you had anything to add to it.
Oh, okay. That's your work. Sure. Okay, let's talk about the monk. I'll talk about the monk and then let's look at the chase. Okay.
Sure.
Great. So I love this piece. It has a very pronounced protagonist. So in the shadow of the hill temple of my hometown runs a busy but narrow road called China, and more, meaning lane of small shops. Okay, so this author is handling the balance of using foreign language and also describing the meaning of that foreign language exceptionally well. I will say for myself, I love reading foreign language. I don't really try to read it. I don't even try to pronounce it, but I have the experience of it. It gives me an atmosphere. And this author does a great job of also defining what those words mean. So I found this piece both exceptionally accessible, but also essentially exotic in a way that I enjoy. Because one of the things about the reader, I think all of us should put this as a baseline. We want to go into another world, and that is created through the details. Like I talk about knowing other human beings. One thing we know about our reader is they picked up our book because they did not want to have the experience of painting their fence, right? They did not want to do the dishes. They did not want to deal with their kids, with their constant demands. They want to go somewhere else. So we need to take that responsibility seriously and make sure we produce that other world. And I feel that way here. So I really like that. The tone of this is great. The name may have rung true once, but there's nothing small about these shops anymore. Most shops have become monstrous by devouring their smaller neighbors, yet a few intrepid shop owners doggedly held on to their domains and clientele. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful writing. And I'm just going to go quickly. There's a lot, obviously, that I'm praising here in terms of the language. And if you open up that writers group on the Facebook page, I hope maybe all of you as authors will share your work there, and you can discuss it there too. Let's see. And there's a monk here, and in this piece, I'll just tell you that the author has already told me that the intention is to write a series of pieces about craving. And in this piece, there's a monk who craves this rose milk that's sold in this little shop across the way, and has been basically forced to sit on the other side of the street by their guru and look at the shop for like a year, So I just love everything about that. It's great. And then it gets to, as great as it is, what effect did it have on the protagonist with whom I have my sympathetic resonance. That remains an issue. So like, I mean, I just want to make a point that like, as this piece is just wonderful. And now I might say that like, so in this piece, and if I were talking to the author, I would say, you know, it could be that this is really just establishing in some ways the protagonistic force. And as I read on, I will see how it involves the protagonist. And I'll understand that protagonist better. And then I will be able to, through that protagonist, have an experience for myself. So that is yet to be seen. But that is the conversation that I would have, because that's, for me, it's an absolutely necessary element of any story, that I have this experience of change, so that really I have something that I'm taking away. Okay, so since this author's not here, I'm going to go back to the chase.
Yeah, so the author Deepa actually pinged on the chat, I think about half an hour back, also saying she had to drop off for some work call.
Oh, well, that's too bad. But please tell her, really a wonderful piece.
She's on the Facebook group, so I'll definitely share this feedback with her, Otis.
Great. Really strong. I love that area. It feels so real. I believe it. And this is, I think, Ashvani, I said this about your work last week, right? When we write words, right, I'm talking about focusing the point of view in the narrator or the character, or back and forth between the protagonist and antagonist, whatever. That's a focusing a point of view. But there is an overall thing created by all the words, right? A kind of honesty, a kind of forthrightness, basically the consciousness of the author. And when that consciousness welcomes you in, does not push you out, welcomes you in, as this piece does, as Ashvani's piece did last week, that is a very, very strong base from which to work, because that's the first most crucial thing. If we welcome the reader in and they're there in this world and happy, then it's just a question of us not blowing it, right? Now it's up to us. You know, the ball's in our court, as they say. Did you want to read? Would you like to read this, the chase?
I don't know. Maybe I'll read a couple of paragraphs and then.
Okay, yeah. Why don't you read to the fourth floor? Let's see. I got a little spot there.
Okay.
Is this showing up on the share?
Yes, it is for me. So I'm assuming it's showing up.
Yeah, just there. Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
I've often done that. I can mark a little place to read too. So I think we'll probably do that rather than read entire pieces. Okay.
Sure. He bounded up the first 3 flights. He bounded up the first flight 3 steps at a time, turned 180 degrees, and then up the second flight 3 steps at a time. Both the man and Ria had gone further up to the second floor. Damn. He sprinted up to the second floor again 3 steps at a time. Not there. Effort. He swore under his breath. He turned to the stairs and climbed 3 steps at a time. She was there, and he almost ran into her. She gave a jolt as she spun around at the sounds from the staircase. "Oh," she said. "What? Couldn't you hear me?" Deva panted, catching his breath. "I just couldn't let that damn thief go. Why did you slow down? Anyway, you were right behind me," she responded, still breathing hard. "Ahead, till you raced ahead." Deva corrected her. "When did you start thinking me to be some comic superhero with superhuman strengths?" "I didn't," Ria answered with a little less conviction now. "I thought he's one and you are two. I mean, we are two." "Yeah, ek se bhale do, 2 are better than 1, Deva nodded, his breath slowly returning to normal, the breathing still heavy, sweat running freely down his forehead, neck and back. He swiped his forehead with the back of his palm as he surveyed the floor. It was long, dark, and empty. The structure was all that there was, with beams and columns and nothing else. Bare concrete floor and ceiling, no tiling, flooring, or electrical wiring, no one else on the floor as far and as best as he could see in the dark. What little light there was came from a corner on the left. "You think he went there?" Deva asked. Not waiting for an answer, staring at the light, moving slowly forward like a moth to a flame, the thought flashed through his mind. While he was still irritated that Ria had rushed headlong into an unknown situation, he now wanted to make the most of it. "Why did you stop here on the third floor?" he asked, inching forward. "I saw him reach the third floor and dart left. By the time I got here, he had disappeared in the dark. I'm sure he went in there," she pointed. "I waited for you so that you didn't rush onto the fourth floor." "Thank you. That was very considerate of you," Deva uttered.
Nice. And I noticed that I actually marked this next moment here. It's coming up. Do you want to see what's in there, or do you want to turn back? She asked with some testiness. So I probably, like I mentioned before, I'd probably cut the testiness. Either you've captured it in the dialogue or you haven't. It's just a tiny thing, though. But you stay here. I will see what's there in the light. If he's run out of some exit at the back, then he's gone, as is your bag. Perhaps he is hiding, in which case I can recover your bag in short order. Walk in the park. Or not, he thought, for the second time. I really like that little addition there. And that goes back, we were talking about it with Ram and the universal issue of having a sense of interiority and exteriority, right? So it's like, we can recover your bag. That's what he says to the exterior and to this woman, or not, which is his interior, which is like suggesting a whole bunch of things. This is more dangerous than it might seem. You never know what's going to happen. An expression I like, the future by definition is unknown. It's like, we don't know what's going to happen, when we round the corner and, meet our fate. We don't know our fate. That's the definition of our fate, So I really like that's just a little moment of juxtaposition of the exteriority and the interiority that really does something great for the reader. That's the takeaway. Using those elements of exteriority and interiority are huge, and also create something that I'm not sure that I'm very fond of this phrase, but it basically creates dramatic irony. It means that we have an understanding of the character's interiority, and it's in conflict with what they say outwardly. So that means we're in on a secret. Dramatic irony. It's great. This is Abhinav. Am I saying that?
Yep.
Close. Abhinav. So the first thing. So this is you walk in. I love how physical this is, and this is where I love writing physicality, and I think a lot about it. The physical, for me, all of us as writers, we can often become very cerebral. We can often think that writing is about us thinking and about us typing. But we're actually trying to always write about people, because remember, people care about other people. Our reader cares about a person. This is how we develop a connection. So I've been on that for a while, and I really try to write people on the page, physical people doing things. And I really like that that's happening here. But then you have some issues, perhaps because everybody knows what it's like to be a physical human being. And so like the first thing I thought here was like, does this author know how hard it is to sprint up a flight of stairs 3 at a time? I mean, I was like, so I did this. I was writing a story about a soldier who had to carry a rifle, and the rifle weighed almost 20 pounds. So, well, maybe a little bit less, 17. So I got a pipe and I cut it that weighed that much, and I went hiking around to see what it would feel like. I love stuff like that, and if you love writing the physical, then you'll love stuff like that. But I'll send you out as like as your assignment to go sprint up some flights of stairs, three at a time.
I walked right into that, didn't I?
No, I love that. I love that you're going for it. It's great that you're going for it. There's a moment later, but this is also a kind of genre piece, right? Where, I mean, we don't know that at first, but he has a Glock on his ankle a little bit later. So he's a police officer or something. He's a person that carries a gun, which would also play a role if he's sprinting up those steps. I will mention. Um, but early on here, there's a little talk about, I'm not a comic book hero. But goes back to this thing is like, he does seem a little bit of a comic book hero because of the physicality. You have to remember that the relationship it's really funny because like this is very cinematic and we would see something like this in the movies. But it's strangely different when we write about it, I think, if we want to write something that's actually realistic. Because what the movies have is they have some character who's bounding up some steps, right? Then they cut, right? And then that character is over in the corner in traction and taking oxygen. And then they shoot again, right? So they're doing it that way and they're excluding the parts where they're, struggling for breath. And what we see is we see a physical human being and we're like, well, we're convinced basically because we witnessed them.
Right.
Writing merges our consciousness. And granted, I'm a particular person because I try to be a very physical person. I think about physicality a lot. It's important to me. So I'm always sort of, and also I have my little masculine competition. I'm like, he can run up those steps 3 at a time. Could I? And I'm like, I'm pretty good shape. I think I'm going to.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I could sprint 2 steps at a time, a couple of flights. So I assumed this guy must be stronger and fitter than me. So maybe he can do 3. So that was a little bit of a leap of faith, if you may call it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I wish I could run around like I could when I was a kid. I really can't. I found out yesterday. I say get into it, but get into it in a real way. I mean, he might feel like if I do something like this, I would feel the burning in my muscles. There's physical realities that exist, and if we deal with those physical realities, then we also create a real world that the reader comes into better. That's really the point I'm making. It's really about that reader association. We sometimes even have to think about, like, even though you think that this guy is very capable, what you really need to think about is how do you make the reader believe in this character. Right. So for that, we have to maybe do other things. This is just a silly example. I'm not meaning to give it so much attention, but really to go to the larger concept.
No, I think that's useful, very useful to I think weigh these kinds of descriptions with their actual feasibility also. A little bit of, I think, exaggeration is probably, I think, okay, but if what's that phrase? If the reader cannot experience a willing suspension of disbelief, I think then things start to fall apart.
Right, exactly. So the willing suspension of disbelief is like, that's the holy grail. The reader is giving that to us, at the beginning. And they're willing to go anywhere. They'll go to Mars. They'll go to this building. They'll go to the rose milk shop. They'll go to all of these places willingly, and they want to. And it's exactly that. Just like I said, once we have them, then it's just us not losing them, right? That's the main thing. So we want to be very careful not to lose them. And then also in this regard, given what they're doing, so I am a person who's chased down people before. I hate to say, in my younger years, but it's scary. Okay, I won't tell you the whole story, but you run and now you realize you're someplace you don't know, and you're in the place that they ran to. So why did they run there, and why did you run into it? Well, we get to the ambush a little bit later, but I think that particularly this character is we're all savvy in this way because we're the human animal. We're the human animal, and we're built to survive. So we know when we're in a comfortable place and when we're not. Even like simple little jellyfish do. You know, they move around. So I think that awareness would be a little bit more on this guy's mind. He might have. Was it in this? Who? Someone had written in their work this week. What was it? There's no job that overconfidence won't screw up. I'm not quoting it directly. Is it in this piece?
Yeah, the third last paragraph, that one line.
Yeah, great line. But we might understand that about this character earlier on, right? Because it seems like he has training, so it actually might make him a little bit foolhardy. I don't know who the woman is, and so I have some questions, you know, like.
Correct.
And believe me, you know, sometimes other people take you into trouble. So that might be the case here, or maybe she's a fellow police officer. I really don't know. Maybe, so I don't know the relationship.
Right.
So all these things are of issue. I have the little comment here. We beware of cliche. So this is something I tell my kids too. Like, you know, that first, you know, I feel bad actually, but you know, I was like, look at those clouds over there. You know, I draw my attention to the kids, you know, looking at these incredible formations that we have because of all the smoke and the colors. And, you know, my daughter's like, they look like cotton candy. And I just went, oh, no, don't. You know, I'm sure she's traumatized. She's going to have to go to therapy. But we don't want to use cliche. Really, we can get pretty far in our writing by actually never having cliched language or cliched sentiment at all. The problem with it is that instantaneously, you know, I mean, I said the other day, like a stitch in time, as soon as I hear the first words, I shut out because it's not new. So we want to really keep the newness and freshness, even if we have to find, okay, if this is really is this really what we want to say? Then we have to find a way to say it differently, or maybe we want to say something newer. You know, we want to get to a deeper perception, but we have to get to, we have this reader, cliche and even stereotype don't come from nowhere. They exist because they're understandable. We have to deal with the common perception of our audience. And this actually goes back to the climbing the stairs. They have a certain perception of physical reality. They have a certain perception of emotional reality, and we work with it, but we also want to draw them into new ground. Does that make sense? That was convoluted as hell, but.
No, certainly, yeah.
Right. So what I'm saying is we work with them. We can't give them, we don't give our reader new emotions that no one on earth has ever seen. We don't give them, you know, physical capabilities no one can even conceive of. We have to take them slowly. You know, even Superman would have to explain why he can fly. Yeah. So, and then the next thing is going back to, remember I did say, like, so the big macro issue is having characters change. And so this piece, like I said, with all the pieces, I didn't have a sense of knowing the character ahead. And again, I go back to wearing the makeup. They have to be we have to really know how they start. Then something happens and they come out differently. And that way I have the journey. This seems like it's an excerpt, so I understand that. But I think conceptually, we still want to keep it really on our mind. We want to get the protagonist on the page. What are they? They're happy, they're hopeful, they're scared. You know, I said scared, but I don't really want to have scared. It's really hopeful that they're going to get what they want, or despairing that they won't get what they want. Those are really the two poles for our protagonist. And then on the other side, if they were in despair, now they're hopeful. Contrast. If they were hopeful, spring. Right? That's
great.
Yeah. So, but I'm a sucker for action. You probably know Elmore Leonard. His advice, they said, how do you write so well? And he says, well, I just cut out the boring stuff.
Yes, I remember that.
All right, let me ask, are there any questions about anything? I will. I love these conversations. Thank you for submitting this work. Like I say, it's hard. For a while I boxed in American style boxing, and I sometimes liken, I have about a couple things to say, and I will say them over and over again. But it's like my coach would be like, keep your chin down, keep your chin down. And I think for us writers, the reason that was important for him to say that all the time is our instinct is, well, we're in a conflict, we get big, we do these various things. We try to become a bully, we try to control the situation, easily. Writers also have these instincts that we go to just because of the way we are, because we're human beings. We as writers and human beings, we actually don't like conflict that much. We don't even like to identify conflict. We like to avoid it. But as writers, we have to embrace it. And we have to embrace it. Like going back, Ram, I was saying to you, we actually have to take the risk, right? A thesis argument is a great one. Arguing a point that everyone already believes is not taking any risk.
Yeah.
Right? And the same with having just the protagonist on the page without the antagonistic force is no risk.
Right.
So we will tend to avoid doing that. It is hard work to do. It's hard work to get the reality of the character on the page, the reality of the human being on the page. But this is our big work. This is think what you will about humankind, but I do say in my teaching, and I really believe it, people are miracles. We're just incredible. We're incredible. All our foibles and difficulties and the way we puff up and the way we, all the things that we do. So just keep going to that, get people on the page in these actions and try to stick with it. Try not to, we're not in the business of resolving issues. We're in the business of, making these tensions that the reader then feels. So, all right. Anything else? Last word? Anyone?
So I can conclude by saying, Otis, thank you again for a wonderful and very illuminating and practical advice-filled session. And for others, we were talking about it at the beginning of the session before. I think probably a lot of you joined, but there's a Facebook group, and join that. It's facebook.com/group/Indic Book Club, all one word. And please do post your writing sample there, and we can carry on the conversation there, because the intent is not to have this as a standalone piece. It is to help each other, critique, encourage, and provide feedback. So please do join the Facebook group.
Yeah, great. And of course, you're welcome to post obviously my markups and all of that. That's if you want to post that, and if you do get involved with talking with each other, I think the most important thing to always remember, and I have a lot of experience in workshops, is that we can sometimes have a tendency to think that we're an instructor, and I think what's better is to realize that actually every one of us is engaged in the struggle. If you're not struggling to write, you're not writing, I don't think. So we're all in the same boat. And the best, I think the best thing that we can do for each other as writers in a workshop is to respond to give our reactions to things, even our emotional reactions, and not deal with trying to fix another person's work. I don't think any of us should be called on to. We're not fixing anyone else's work because no other person's work is broken. It's in a process, so it's not a question of it being fixed. And no writer, right, wants to be fixed, and we don't need to be, But instead, if we give our reactions to work and say, I was really engaged, because that's what we're talking about all the time. I was engaged. you know, I was in this. I was imagining this. I was there. I was feeling something. We want to get used to reading like that too. Or we might say, I was confused. Confusion is not good. So that means the writer can deal with how to fix that confusion. You know, leave it to them. Or I was bored. Those are, remember the two poles? Boredom and confusion. We don't want those. You know, even if a person says, I was reading along and I loved it, but then I started thinking about doing my laundry. Well, then that's the writer's problem. So they have to figure that out. Turning that page, that's what it's all about. We have to get them, once, we can't control whether they opened a book or not. But once they do, we have to make them turn that page. So, well, thanks all. I really enjoyed it. Enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you, everyone. A good session. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, indeed. Thank you, Abhinav.
See you next time.
See you all.
Next Wednesday, send your samples. Thank you.